My name is Rebecca Osborn. I offered this presentation at the conference because I'm in a lot of the T.A.B groups and other art ed groups on Facebook, and there's constant questions regarding. Speak up?
Yeah, I don't think the mic's working.
Okay. I sound loud to myself. Thank you for that. So it really seemed like something people are asking about and curious about. So here we are, and I'm really glad there are so many people here. All right, so the school where I currently teach is a 5th and 6th grade only school in Agawam, Massachusetts. Prior to that, I was teaching in a high school for several years. So when I switched to the lower grade levels, that's when I started to think that really structured lessons with one specific outcome that I was looking for was not appropriate for the age group. And then, of course, you can tab at all age levels. But that's what led me to start sort of looking around for a direction to go that was different and interesting. I'm going to talk about what I was seeing that prompted my personal change to this type of pedagogy. I'll talk about what our studio at our school looks like from day to day. And I'll talk about the differences that I've observed in students since switching to a T.A.B philosophy from discipline-based. And the main thing that will carry through the entire presentation is organization. That you have to be so organized in order to then be flexible. At the end, I'll also answer some frequently asked questions that I've seen come up again and again, questions I've been personally asked many times, and then of course I'll open up for questions that any of you might have for me. With T.A.B specifically, it stands for Teaching for Artistic Behavior, which if you're here, I'm guessing you know that part. But on this spectrum of choice that is created by the art of ed, they have, sorry, I wish I could go over there and point. Imagine that. T.A.B is all the way on the right, okay? Discipline-based is in the second and limited choice. So that's basically the distance that I have scaled in my art studio at work over the past several years. So this definition is very loose. It seems here where they're saying artwork is consistently learner-led, educator supports learning with demonstrations and centers. Yes, however, the definition is so much more broad than that. It's a good place to start, but don't feel locked in by that. Like, for example, I just recently set everything up in a whole new way and took away many of the freedoms that kids had been having because COVID disrupted everything and they don't know how to have that independence right now, and it has to be retaught. So no matter where you're at and where you want to go, you always have to remain flexible within that, and that's the main sticking point. Also, the way the studio works has to be based on the students and what you see them needing in the moment. So I was observing that students didn't know how to function with like full roam of the studio. So I took that part away and I left choice everywhere that I could, and it's going really well now. So I foresee that by next year I can loosen it up again. So that's what I mean about this is a starting point for a definition, and then within that you need to be flexible. That's how I feel about it.
T.A.B.
There are 3 guiding principles. What do artists do is one of them. The student is the artist is another one. For me, that's the main thing that matters. That's the underlying principle of everything I do day to day at work. And the classroom is the child's studio. that can be challenging to get out of the mindset that it's your classroom, it's their studio. So when they're coming in, you have artists joining you in the art studio, and that sets the tone. And the tone sets the culture, and it flows from there. T.A.B. is a grassroots arts education philosophy. It was started by teachers, and it's continued to be supported by teachers. And since the advent of social media, everyone is now aware that it's a thing, so it has exploded and become really popular and interesting to a lot of us arts educators. The T.A.B. people, and some of the founders are still extremely active in the groups online, which is helpful and wonderful. Something I've noticed about those, like the T.A.B. group, the choice arts educators, it's all kind of the same crew of people. They're welcoming, they're understanding, they're helpful, and they are kind. Like ongoing, time after time, questions are answered thoughtfully, respectfully, and just with kindness. I feel like many of the other groups that I'm in, comments can be really unkind, and I never see that with the T.A.B. groups. So just that makes you feel like, oh, I'm supported, so I can do this. And if it hadn't been that way, I probably wouldn't be here now. What do artists do? Our first one, right? That is all based in my studio anyway. All of this is about my personal journey, and every other T.A.B. teacher has a different one, and they have a different way of doing it. That can also be challenging for teachers, that there's not like a specific set of guidelines and rules to follow. You have to be flexible. But what comes out of it is worth it. So this art studio habits of mind, which are everywhere now, but if you don't know what they are, look that up, print some out and hang them up. That's how we approach the what do artists do. Anytime a question arises, it's put back on the young student artist. You're the artist. What do artists do? And we continuously go back to that question, and that changes the whole culture of the room as well. Instead of asking a question and getting a direct, like directive style answer, they're getting mentorship, and the answer includes their thoughts. The second one, the student is the artist. This creates the vibe of an art studio. Like I started using the word art studio instead of art room like 4 or 5 years ago. And just doing that has a big impact in giving student agency back to the children. It's a workshop vibe. Like think back art school or a museum class that maybe you've taken where you're in a room, your instructor is an artist who is more educated in that particular thing than you are, and you're working together with them. They're supporting your vision. That's what my T.A.B. art studio is like. The kids come in, they're every one of them respected individually as an artist, and I'm there to help give them the tools and information they need to grow as an artist.
And then finally, the classroom is the child's studio. So within the T.A.B. studio, things are divided up by media or materials, and children determine where in the room they work and what materials they are working with. It's all based on what they've envisioned for the final outcome. And all of the students' choices as the artist are respected. If they want to abandon work because they're not happy with how it's going, okay, they're an artist. Artists do that. They're welcome to make that choice, and so on. There's a lot more information on the guiding principles on the teachingforartisticbehavior.org website.
All right, so why the switch for me, personally? Like I said before, I switched from a high school level to a lower grade level, and some of the things I was seeing were unsettling. And the main thing was that kids were unable to make decisions on their own. Like, they wanted instruction on every single next step, to the point where even if they were doing perfectly fine, they would not proceed on their own without getting clearance. That was alarming. So, and exhausting. That's another thing. It saves you a lot of the running around when everyone needs you at the same time. I wanted to fix that helplessness that I was seeing in them. So I did this. There are two questions that kept coming up that were really irritating to me personally. Irritating is probably the wrong word to say, I apologize.
Nope, it's
but
the right word.
Thank you. It was, am I done? Am I done really? I don't know why, but it got to me a lot. I was like, this is yours. Like, I can tell you, I can advise, but I'm not going to tell you if you're done or not. And I think that that's a flaw in a lot of systems where, like, you make a sample and the kid's work needs to look like your sample when it's done, and so they're asking you, who made the sample, is it done? Heave-ho. Oh, and the other one, is this what you want? That bothers me a lot. Is this what I want? Well, I want you to succeed and grow as an artist, so no, asking me that is not what I want. Sorry, back to the first one. Like, on that point, I wanted to also talk about, this is something that's possible in the art studio. If our goal, our job, is to take kids from where they are and elevate them to whatever is next for them personally, and if that's what we deeply care about, that's what I deeply care about, then the outcome of their project isn't really the thing that matters as much as their personal growth. So because this is something that I wanted to do and saw value in, I did it, even though it made some things more challenging, which I'll talk about later in the presentation. But in a school, so many of the classes are rigid by design. Like, they have to be. You can't, in a class that has a textbook in the whole district, every grade, kids are doing the same thing at the same time, and it's just, that's how it is. There's no wiggle room for a lot of teachers. Because I do have the wiggle room, I knew that this was the best thing for my students and for our school in the long run. Okay, saying yes. There was an instance, this was my first or maybe second year at the school that I'm currently at. This is the 7th year now. And I was doing a demonstration. I always call the kids close for a demo, or at least I did before COVID. So I was sitting, it was something that had to do with drawing a self-portrait or something similar. They were all going to be doing that project in their own way, because I've always given at least some level of choice, but still they were all doing the same project. During the demo, this one boy was, and he was, like in my pocket kind of kid. He loved art, he was great at it, but he was just always bouncing off the walls and he couldn't remain still. So I remember him like right here because he's interested, but he's just like bouncing. And in that moment, he was taking all of the focus from the lesson for the other kids who were interested. And I was just like, can you please, for just like 2 minutes, just calm your body or go over there? And he was just like, can I hot glue? And I was like, yes you can. You can go ahead over there, you can hot glue. And a lot of people in moments like that think that then all the other kids are gonna wanna go hot glue, but that's typically not the case. At least that's not what I have found. They all understand the situation and they're trying to learn about a self-portrait or whatever. Saying yes to that person in that moment was an aha moment for me in my practice. He went off and did his thing. He made something amazing, which he always did, and the other kids got the information they needed. So that's where it started for me. That moment thinking, okay, this artist needs something else. I allowed him to do that. He expressed what he needed, and things ran really smoothly, and everybody was then engaged. So yeah, try saying yes. If you're considering switching over to T.A.B in one form or another, maybe start in September, but now you have the whole spring to kind of dabble. That's what I did anyway. It simplified many other day-to-day situations. So there are so many times that kids are pulled from the special classes, or whatever they're called in your district and schools. We're called the specialists, and the specials classes are unfortunately, but I guess necessarily, where the kids are pulled from. So if they have band or speech or any other pull-out service, a guidance group, they're not in art. So knowing with a T.A.B studio that if they miss a demo, or even if they're sick and they miss a few days, or if they have COVID and have to miss a couple of weeks, they have an understanding that when they return, they're just picking up where they left off because they're the artist. Like, if they missed a couple of demos, they can easily get caught up, either through me or through another student, or through a video. I have a whole system going. But yeah, it's easy enough for them to catch up from wherever it was that they left off. It takes care of natural differences. Like, you know, we all know the word differentiation. We have always differentiated lessons. In a T.A.B studio, though, it does it itself. Like a child, we're pushing them as individuals to reach and stretch, try new things, and grow as a person, as well as an artist. And they choose something they're comfortable with. So not everyone's doing the same thing. Everyone is doing their own thing in whatever way they can. So if they're comfortable with the fancier supplies and they're doing work on a really high level, great. If they're unable to do that or don't want to because they're not interested and they want to do something else, great. You support them in their own choices. Things like pace. You set a project and half the class is done after 2 days and the other half of the class isn't going to be done obviously for another day or two. What are the kids who are done doing? This fixes that too. When they're done, they are then writing an artist statement about their finished work, and then they're going on and planning their next work. It's their own personal flow, which is very freeing for them, as well as I felt that was freeing for me too. I no longer have to say, oh, well, you can free draw, or you can get a coloring page, or you can whatever, insert thing here. You're not trying to scramble for extra things for kids to do when they're finished. It takes care of things like tactile sensitivities, like the list goes on and on. Kids work with what they're comfortable working with or what they're interested in working with. And that little creature, a 5th grade boy made this. He had access to knowledge of how to attach cardboard for sculpting. He had tape, and that's about it. That's duct tape and Sharpie. This thing, like, its mouth opened and closed. This is the kind of individualized artwork you get with choice when a kid is planning their own work. That is something that I was so impressed with, and I loved it so much. He made a whole series of them in the end. But it's not something I ever would have assigned for everyone to do. So that's what you end up with. All right, the basics. So it's all about organization in the beginning. So often people are like, they get to do whatever they want. Well, yeah, eventually. At first, you're training them. If you're a teacher who teaches several grade levels, you really only have to teach them how it works for the first couple months of whatever year it is that you start this. For example, me with 5th and 6th grade, I really train the 5th graders in how to use the studio for several weeks into months in their 5th grade year, and then by the time they're in 6th grade, I mean, they come back from the summer already knowing what they're going to be doing in the art studio, and they're all pumped to get in there again. So yes, organization, so that you can later give them free rein. So I have have-tos, which people call different things. I call it a have-to day. Those are the days where everyone is doing the same thing and they're learning skills. But basically, those are the days where we unlock the supplies for future use. Once they're unlocked, then the kids are considered trained on them, and they know that if they haven't had a demonstration on something, then that's off limits until they do have a demonstration on it. So on the first day of class, they get the introduction and the overview of how it all works, kind of like what we're doing here today, general overview. And we make sketchbooks. Not every T.A.B. teacher does this. This is just a way that I kind of bookend the class period. Those sketchbooks also become where they plan, where they reflect, and a name tag. There are 600 children in our school at any given year, like 550 to 600. That's a lot of names, so having the name tags aspect as the cover of the sketchbook, for me, that's a lot of things. So the order that I open things, drawing first. I think mostly everybody does that because you need that first, let's face it. You need, in order to sketch for painting later, you need to have done drawing first. We open drawing, and it's 2 classes. The introductory day, making the sketchbook, and then the second day of art is block or bubble letters on the sketchbook, practicing all of the different drawing materials that are opened with that. After I open drawing and painting with them with a have-to day, we pause and I give them 2 more art classes to practice what it'll be like when they have open studio. Drawing, painting, 2 days of open studio to use those supplies only. Then we dial it back in and we do a have-to for sculpture, paper arts, which is collage basically, fiber arts, and printmaking. I do open separately, but I do that later, like halfway through the class. Then once all of the studios have been opened in that fashion, I switch to daily demos. And then occasionally I'll open a pop-up studio, which is just a little bit of a different way of doing things. With a pop-up studio, that's stuff that's only open for a limited amount of time, usually because it's a higher price item, like felting. We do wet felting in 5th, needle felting in 6th, and wool is expensive, the supplies are expensive, so that's got a limit on how long it's open. 2 weeks, gets put away. Yes?
What do you do in those daily demos? Just like more specific?
Mm-hmm. The question is, what do we do in the daily demos? And something very specific. So once all of the centers are open generally, then the daily demos are 5 minutes to 7 minutes, depending on what it is, on one specific skill to add to what they have already going. And those have to be flexible too. Like if it really ends up being what the group, like what direction the class is going. So there's also a lot of like small group demos throughout the class. But yeah, so it's going back into one of the studios and choosing what should come next for them. So in this studio, you can see at the bottom in brown, that's my little area. I kind of made myself an office within the room. There's 2 doors, the door from the hall and the door to the other classroom, and that's kind of a nice division down there. The ceiling tiles are painted rainbow, so I have them to line up. Again, like where you can have rules and order, you should. So there are definitely things that keep it very structured so that it can be loose in other ways. So on the left, there's 2 sinks on the wall and printmaking painting. So everything is sort of set up by media. Ideally, like I said, I had to dial things back in. So currently, it's not like this, but it will be again as soon as we can, as soon as it is logical and works. So everything is set up by media, and the way that I do it is they have assigned seats when they arrive to class. We need to have assigned seats, we're supposed to, in terms of like if there's a sub and they have to take attendance. So on the first day, kids pick their own seat, and then I write it down. So they come in, they go to their seats, sketchbook passers get their stuff and pass it out. Then they're called to the daily demo at the big blue table in the middle, and they're shown whatever the demo is for the day. And afterward, they're allowed to disperse to whatever studios they want to work in. So they have assigned seats, but they're only in them for like 3 minutes at the beginning of each class during sketchbook time. And as a fallback if I need that for some reason. They also sit in those seats during the opening of the studios and the half 2 days. So you can read how it's like the studio and then the supplies that go with it are in the same area of the room. This is one way to do it. Lots of other TAB teachers have assigned seats that remain the same all the time, and students, when they need something, they go get it. So they'll have the media still set up specifically in different areas of the room. And when kids need something, they bring it back to their table that they always sit at, which is what I'm doing right now. So either way works. When I open Collage, this is an example of that. It's one skill for Collage at each table in the room, and they go and they'll bring their little sketchbook, they go to one spot, I have a corresponding video, and I play the video for them. They learn from that, and then they get to it. So that JPEG is like printable and downloadable. So if you're, go in, download the presentation, and then you'll be able to click on those 2 links. I have a whole bunch of videos online already, and you're welcome to use them if you need or want to. They're pretty decent. Some of them, the audio is still a little hokey. I'm learning. But the Collage one is one of my favorites, and it's effective too. Our classes are 45 minutes long.
Once all of the studios have officially been opened, this is what a typical 45-minute class looks like pretty much every time. Artists arrive and they sit in their self-chosen assigned seats, and sketchbooks are passed out by 2 assigned sketchbook passers per class, and after a few weeks they really get into the swing of it. They come in and immediately go get out the class's tray of sketchbooks and zip around passing them out really quick. They work in sketchbooks for about 3 minutes just to get into the right state of mind to be in the art studio. And then after about 3 minutes or so, I call everyone for the daily demo. I call them close to me and I do a demonstration. I either do it live or I use one of my videos that is pre-recorded. After about 5 minutes of the demonstration, I say, okay, you can go where you want to work today. And they take their sketchbooks with them and disperse throughout the room to the specific media-based area they want to work in for the day. So the assigned seats are really only for the first 3 minutes of each class. For 30 minutes, they work in the open studios. They get about 5 minutes at the end to clean up. And if there's something extra messy going on, like clay, for example, I will alert those artists first. Like, hey, there's about 7 minutes left. It's time for you to clean up now. Then the painters around 5 minutes. People who are drawing and don't have much media out in their area at about 3 minutes. And then I try to reserve the last 2 minutes for artists to get back into their sketchbooks and just write a sentence or draw a quick picture of what they accomplished during class that day. And I'm going to be honest here, often we don't get to that. I forget to say it, and the kids are so involved in what they're doing that the last thing they want to do is write something. but it is ideally the way that I would end each class.
So this is not an image of a daily demo. It's just an image of kids engaged in work in the studio.
Daily demos. These are also called 5-minute time or demonstration time. With daily demos, I'm able to map the curriculum. I can teach specific skills per grade level and track our use of state and national standards. Daily demos also provide a fallback for artists who don't know what to do and are overwhelmed with all of the options. If I find a student struggling to get going after several minutes, I'll just remind them that if they don't know what to do, that whatever was last demonstrated, that's what they should be doing. If the skill's something students absolutely must master, I make it a have to. For some teachers, it's really concerning to them to give a 5-minute demonstration and then see nobody try it that day. I typically see kids try something new after they finish projects that they're already working on. Another tip is to allow for some space between materials demos so that artists are more likely to be looking for their next adventure. For example, if after a demo on, say, brush markers, I notice that many students are involved in a project with them, I would do an art studio habits of mind discussion or an art history video for the next couple of classes until it seems time for more media choices to be introduced.
I really love this because it's an example of T.A.B being so successful. It's an example of half of the rules I had about this project being broken. And it's an example of a strong moment of a teacher, mentor, supporting their student artists in what they were interested in.
So I did a pop-up studio with needle felting for 6th graders. It was a pop-up studio, meaning that it's only available for a small amount of time for whatever reason. In this case, because the materials are expensive and I didn't want to go through tons of wool and tons of felting needles. But this group of boys just became so involved in it that I kept it open just for them for a while longer. And they were the only ones really interested in keeping it open anyway. So there wasn't any jealousy factor or anything. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that typically I try to keep kids away from using copyrighted things. I try to help them to create their own new ideas. But all of these characters are from the game Plants vs. Zombies. So what happened was that one student, one boy, and that's another thing. This is all fiber arts, which is stereotyped as a girl thing. But with everything fiber arts, at least here in this art studio, it's the boys who love it and obsess over it. Everything from finger knitting to sewing to weaving to felting. The boys love it, and it keeps them busy and physically active as well. So one kid made one of these creatures, and then his friend wanted to make another one, and then his friend, and in the end, there were 5 boys for months on end sculpting soft sculpture with wool. And this was the final result. They were bringing it back and forth from school to home. I don't allow them to bring things like needles back and forth. So they had a set of their own at home, and then they came and used what we had here at school when they were at school. It was really great, and I was just so impressed with their dedication that there wasn't really anything I wanted to do but support them in that.
Positive overall changes.
Students have thrived in this art studio in the past 4 years. The positive changes have been really obvious to me. Student engagement has increased. Student anxiety, at least regarding anything to do with art class, has all but disappeared. Students quickly came to value the freedom they have over their own time while in the studio. They're able to articulate what they're doing and why they're doing it with confidence and pride. I believe that that's the result of being respected as the artist, as the one in charge of their own work. I've also noticed far less damage to art supplies and furniture in the art studio, probably having something to do with the increased engagement. And there has been far less negative talk, like, I can't, or I don't want to, or this doesn't look good. There's been a lot less negative talk about their work. And the studio has like the vibe, the feel, the culture of an art studio versus a traditional classroom. It's artists working together in a shared space. It feels like a community with art at the center.
If anyone is like going to stay another couple minutes, I'll happily answer questions. I know you're probably trying to get to your next session, and I am 3 minutes over my official time. Thank you. I appreciate that. Those are all clickable links too to all of the different T.A.B forums, and my YouTube channel is the top right in your art studio. Okay.
Now I'm going to talk about some questions that I have personally been asked frequently by other art teachers and others in my teaching peer community. The first one, do students learn as much? The answer to that is that they learn much more. It's different, but it's definitely more overall learning in the end. Everything from like life skills, art skills, to personal growth and ways of thinking. Next question, are studios ever closed once open? Yes, they are. They're closed at the end of a semester, and then they're closed again at the end of the school year. And at that time, I sort of do it in reverse of how I open them. I close them down one or two at a time. And then they're also closed if the materials in the studio are misused. And I do that by class. Like, for example, if the paint studio is left a complete disaster after a certain class leaves, I make a note, and then next time they are there, they're reminded how to properly use those materials, and they're not allowed to use them for a class or two until trust is earned back, and then it reopens.
The question was, do I find that after the daily demo, everyone wants to try what was demoed? And then I have to like spread them out and figure that out. I actually don't find that unless it's a pop-up studio. And it's interesting because sometimes I'll do a demo and then I'll say, okay, go where you want to work today. And literally no one does what I demoed. And which at first is really alarming. But then with time, I realized that it's because they're all in the middle of a project that they're into. So that's the thing, is that they're just free to go back and continue their work and use what you showed if they want to, if it's applicable to them. But then I noticed also in observing my classes that after they finished whatever they were working on, then they will try things that were shown, a week or two before. It's really quite interesting. I also learned how to pace the demos because I do a 5-minute demo every single time, no matter what, because that helps keep the organization and it does have that classroom factor of like, I am the person in charge here, we are at school. However, this is about you and this is your space. So I do it every single time for that. But I also sometimes, if I feel like everyone is engaged in work and they're moving along really well with something they're already doing, I'll add a skill. So the demo, instead of being like a whole new material, will be, you've only used 2H pencils. Let's talk about the variety of graphite pencils that we have here for you to use.
Next question. How do you start the switch from traditional to T.A.B.? Well, you can do it slowly or you can just go for it and jump all in at once. My personal story is that I began experimenting and letting kids have more choices and options within the room. I began saying yes whenever I could, as I talked about earlier in the presentation. And I believe it was springtime when I first even realized that T.A.B. was a thing that existed. And I started researching what it was, reading the books, reading everything in the Facebook forum, and just learning and making notes so that when fall arrived, I could start school full T.A.B. all in. During those beginning stages, I also found it really important and valuable to be completely transparent with students and explain to them that I was trying this whole new thing and that they were the first ones to experience it, and to give me feedback as needed. And I often take their feedback and make changes based on it because the space is ultimately for them.
The question was, do I limit the number of people, artists per station? I don't, but some people do. I have a specific number of chairs at each station, and I keep it to that. I'm like, no, there's no chairs left, you can't sit there. However, I do have a giant overflow area in the center. The center table where the daily demos are, that's kind of our meeting place. You can work on anything at that table. So if fiber arts is full, which it fills up the fastest because there's only 4 chairs, then anyone else who wants to do that can get their supplies and then bring them to the middle table. There's enough seats in the room, so that's just flexible for me.
Next question. This one is very commonly asked. What if the art doesn't look as good and doesn't look as finished? Will it look as good when we have to do an art show or a bulletin board? Well, kind of like, do students learn as much? And yes, they learn more, but it's just different. It's the same with the finished artwork. Sometimes it doesn't look as good. Sometimes it looks just about the same. And often it looks far better and more interesting than it ever has before. So yes, it is as good, but it is different. And sometimes it requires an explanation. For example, at the beginning of the school year, when I put a bulletin board up, I include many things. Like, I will include images that are just paint splotches on a paper, and then next to it, I'll include a printout of the studio habit of mind, develop craft. I can learn to use tools and materials and the practices of an art form. And I'll put, what do artists do? Artists practice in order to learn different art forms. And later on in the semester, as artwork starts looking more refined, I might include a sign for engage and persist. I can learn to embrace problems of importance and develop focus within my artwork. And I will include work that has taken more time and is a little bit more thoroughly completed. But it's all about helping the community to understand what's going on in the art studio and the value that it has, which is really, really great value.
Yeah. The question is, do I have them take notes during the demo? Yes, sometimes. It depends on what it is. But yes, often I do. And I also encourage kids who've already done things to reteach. So if a student is like, you demoed whatever brush markers a couple weeks ago, I didn't try it yet, I want to try it now. And I can say like, Elena over here has been really successful with that. Why don't you go sit with her today and she'll help you kind of get up to speed. So it's all flexibility and utilizing what you have to go forward.
How do you limit?
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
How do you limit and restock supplies?
How do I limit and restock supplies? It's really interesting about supplies. I only limit them if it's a pop-up studio, but sometimes I don't. It really is like, there's actually a slide coming up that's a perfect example of that. But I have cabinets that are not for student access. So everything that I have out for them has a place that the extras are stored. So it's often like, usually not everyone is doing the same thing. So I don't go through stuff as fast. I only go through things quickly when it's a have to and everyone is doing the same thing. So yes, I hope that answered your question.
And the final question that I'll do for today: how have community members felt about it? Well, I have to say that the response from the community has just been all positive. I haven't received any negative feedback, and I'm sure that that is not true for every TAB teacher out there, but it has been true here. Students, as I already reviewed, have thrived. They love being able to decide what they are doing with their time. They just love it, and they absolutely thrive. Parents have reached out specifically to tell me how much their children enjoy being in the space because they have freedom of choice. Students and parents, absolutely. And then administration. My administration happens to be very supportive, and they trust that I know what I'm doing. So that has been beneficial, especially during the learning curve of all of this. However, it's a very forward-thinking way of teaching, and most administrators will support that because it is good for everyone. It's good for students, it's good for the school, it's good for the community, creating young people who are able to think for themselves. Yeah, so that's my last question for now, but feel free to email me if you would like me to answer other ones. These are all tab-specific clickable links that can be found in the description of this video, along with many other resources. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. It really helps me out.